For this assignment, we are going to be using plaster wraps to create a mask shape on top of a mold. Now, sometimes when you are using a mold, you need to prep the surface first, either by putting a light layer of Vaseline or cooking spray on it. I'm going to test this out and see if we can get away without using it, and then I will let you know in class if we need to prepare the surface. So what we have are plaster strips and warm water, and you want your plaster strips pre-cut before you do this. This is a very simple technique with the plaster wraps. We just need to dip it in warm water, and I suggest that you hold on to both ends when you dip it. And then we don't want it to be soaking wet, so just let it drip or squeegee that extra off. And we are just going to start layering the plaster right on top of the mask mold. And when we're doing this, our goal is to kind of overlap, because we want to add 2 to 3 layers of plaster. And you really want to push that plaster into the mold. When you are laying down your plaster, think about the edge of your mask. We don't want the plaster to wrap around the edge of the mold, because then it won't come off. So we want to make sure that we are leaving the plaster edges. You can try to make your edges look crisp or clean by pushing them close to the edge, or you can leave them jagged, and we can always try to trim them with scissors after. So you are just going to continue the process of dipping your plaster until you get a nice layer of 1 to 2 plasters. So I'm going to pause it and catch up. Once you have your base layer of plaster done, you can start building up areas. Right now this is pretty plain. I've just followed the contours of the face mold, but I can add so much more to this with different layers and buildups of the plaster. If I wanted to create maybe creases or areas of wrinkles in the forehead, I could do that. Basically, once your wet plaster is attached to the first layer, it's going to stick. So whatever you want built up, you are just going to attach to that base layer. So think about which features you want to pop out three-dimensionally from your mask and add those to your base layer. If you know that you want the eyes to appear closed or covered in plaster, you can just layer the plaster over top of the eye sockets. If you want the eyes open, or if you want to be able to see through the mask, you can do 2 things. You can either not put plaster around that area, or once the plaster is dry, we could go back in with an X-Acto blade and we could remove it. So think about where you want to build up areas on your mask and add those layers. Once you have built up the layers to your mask, you are ready to let it sit and dry on the mold. It's probably going to need to dry overnight, probably 24 to 48 hours depending on how thick or wet it was. You should be able to lift the mold up and transport it, and you should have already prepared the surface by putting your name on a piece of masking tape underneath so that it's easy to identify. The really important part is any of your dry wraps can be reused, so just don't get any extra water on those.